I have to make a couple of apologies. I just thought the first one was not my name. My name is Richie Ben. I'm the Scottish Socialist Party National Trade Union Organiser, and also was the first shop steward or convener sacked by a company during the course of COVID for standing up for members' rights against a multinational. But in introducing me, the apologies apart from them to make, which is to do with speakers having complications getting here. One of them being talked off the bus with the rest of the passengers, I have to add, and having to get here shortly. But also the fact that one of our speakers, Chris, is away to meet with the night shift in the cleansing service, and will get here when he gets here, essentially, we'll slot it in. Also, however, I have to make a general apology. We couldn't provide you with free public transport, unlike the delegates to COP26, who for 2 weeks get that. We couldn't afford to put you up in flash hotels in order to demonstrate how eco-friendly we are. So we have to grovel an apology for that on the part of the SSP. But nevertheless, thank you for turning out tonight and coming along to listen. What we're trying to do is put across something that's entirely different to what's been discussed in the hot air chamber of COP26 amongst the big corporations and the capitalist politicians who come together to discuss climate change, which is, as I've said on other occasions, is the equivalent of criminals returning to the scene of their crimes. Because it's the capitalist polluters who are meeting in COP26. It's a simple fact that nearly 3/4, 71% of all pollution since 1988 has been spewed out by the 100 biggest companies on this planet. And then they meet to discuss climate change and what to do about it. The same companies, of course, indulge in exploitation of working people for profit, and then they meet to discuss our futures. It would make you sick, and would also make you angry, and hopefully it would make you determined to fight for a different kind of society. And this meeting tonight is a contribution to the discussion about that different kind of society, where we want to put a uniquely working class viewpoint and a socialist viewpoint to the whole issue of climate and the issue of exploitation and poverty. In a nutshell, pollution and poverty and what we do about it. And I'm really genuinely proud to be sharing a platform and sharing this meeting with the panel of speakers that we've got tonight. On the one side, it's a group of workers immediately in struggle that we want to help to build solidarity with and assist them in their struggle on their day-to-day issues, which is related to climate action. Because if you don't have a workforce with rights, they won't have the right to improve the conditions, including the climate conditions in their workplace, for example. And also, along with that, we have others, and I'll introduce one at a time, through a list. We have others who are lifelong trade unionists and lifelong socialists and fighters for the working class that I'm really proud to share this platform with. Now, I've had to rejig the order of speakers due to travel arrangements and other aspects of the class struggle. So, the first speaker tonight is Mandy Marshall. Mandy is the lead RMT union rep on Serco's sleeper service, the trains that could replace a lot of the short-haul flights if it was properly expanded and invested in. Mandy's been involved in pitch battles for every year in the last few years, and she'll explain that. I don't want to try and explain it secondhand. And she's remained determined, remained honest, remained a frontline fighter on behalf of our members. So the first speaker, like I said, Mandy Marshall, lead rail, maritime and trade transport union rep on the sleeper service to cruise, who are currently taking strike action.
Guys, what you have to be able to make it the half steps in slightly on, so I will use my notes more than other people. So, as Richard said, I am Mandy Marshall. I have been lead RMT rep for Central Caledonian Sleeper for a number of years. We have, over the past 7 years since Circuit took over, been involved in 5 disputes, ranging from safety, and this is the first, we're currently in dispute over pay rise. This is the first one that's been money orientated, every other one has been regarding safety of the staff. I guess the reason that they've asked me to step in was because, like the vast majority of you here, I'm passionate about the world we live in and want it back for my own grandchildren and the generation they have coming after them. And I guess the other reason is because of the current dispute with Caledonian Super. RMC have stepped up the campaign reminding Transport Scotland that rail workers are essential workers. Meanwhile, the Scottish train operating companies have continually pleaded poverty when it's come to the provision of fair pay. The Scottish Government has only recently, after a long and costly battle by members, lifted restraints on pay for ScotRail employees, but they haven't done so for Caledonian Super employees. Our railway employees performed an essential role along with other key workers throughout the pandemic, and they now have a fair pay fight while the cost of living is rising still. And this just isn't acceptable. Keep in mind that nothing's been requested that's been unreasonable, it's just been in line with the cost of living. So they're just looking for pay justice, they're not looking for anything beyond reason. RMT have joined forces with other three leading rail unions and TUC to highlight the need for fairness for all workers who have kept our economy and society going over the last 18 months. And RMT's mission is to ensure the voice of essential transport workers is now properly heard. Together with the other rail unions, we have developed a vision for Scotland Railways. Our vision recognises rail services as a vital part of Scotland's economy. By bringing Scotland's Railway back into public ownership and developing a system that reinvests into rail infrastructure instead of using the current for private profit system, these visions could easily become a reality. At RMT, we're calling for Abellio ScotRail's proposed to cut 12% of services, which amounts to 100,000 services a year or 300 services per day, to be withdrawn, and for the Scottish Government to make a solid commitment to protect the Scottish rail services. It is unfathomable that the Scottish Government, which is already managing the franchise under its emergency measures agreement, is overseeing drastic and damaging cuts to the sustainable low carbon rail network. It will do nothing to make Scotland a net zero nation, and will just push people into cars despite the Scottish Government's goal of reducing car kilometres by 20% by 2030. It's clear these cuts will be bad for passengers and bad for Scotland's climate change goals. And this is why RMT is calling for the Scottish Government to block the proposed service cuts and instead commit to protecting the services and the jobs within Scotland Railway. There are various online petitions that support our vision and protecting the rail network for a more sustainable future, and I'd strongly urge you to visit the RMT website, have a look to see our various campaigns and our vision, and before you leave the site, please do sign up petitions. Help us in our bid to build a clean Scotland.
Thanks very much. I should explain that Nick Hogg, the RMT regional organiser, was coming here, but unfortunately managed to overdo himself. So he sends his apologies and his best wishes to the meeting. Now, to give my instructions, there are simply directions to our young comrade who's somewhere close. I think it was all very fine and but the next speaker is a woman who, again, I'm proud to introduce as the speaker at this meeting. Shona Thompson is GMB convener within the Glasgow City Council. She was one of the leaders of the very famous and very honourable fight and strike for equal pay in 2018. Of course, as we said in this book that you'll be buying later on, there's a reference to the fact that it's workers' power that achieves change and improvements in people's lives, not bits of paper in Parliament. It requires struggle in order to get the change of law. For example, equal pay was passed as a law in this country in 1970, but it didn't come about with the goodwill of MPs as such. It came because of the strike of the ports, women machinists and Dagenham in 1968. And here's the rub. They had to go out on strike 2 years later to get the equal pay legislation actually implemented in their job. So it's working class power that's required to bring about change, whether that to be the conditions, the wages, the quality, or the environment. And therefore, I want to introduce Shona Thompson, GMB convener, and as I said, one of the leading figures in the fight for equal pay for women in Glasgow City Council a few years ago.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me along tonight, Richie. This is it. I'm from a working class background, always have been. I was brought up one of 9 children by my mum on her own, and we were very, very poor, so we knew what struggles were. And for me to combat worker struggles, you have to have experienced something along the way in your life. It kind of directs you to where you're going to go. And, thankfully, it put me in Glasgow at the right time, the right place to get my voice for these workers out there, and myself. Okay, so we, as you know, the Glasgow Equal Pay, that's now 15 years since all these workers have been discriminated against. 15 years they've been underpaid. Granted, they did get a payout in 2018, but we're still, every day, they're still underpaid. Now, I will go on about Glasgow City Council quite a lot tonight because that is where all my kind of struggles for my workers are there. Glasgow City Council created an alio because they thought that they could just put this to the side. They created an alio cordia, all the school workers, cleaners, carers, just all the very low paid workers. They created this alio cordia, put them to the side, made them this limited company, still part of the council, but an alio, and that was it. And then we were gone and we were forgotten about from the council. Okay, so that was a struggle in its own when we went to Cordia. I mean, I've been there for over 20 years, as my colleague here, Francis, as well, sitting there. I've been there, and it was a struggle because they protected our terms and conditions that we had, our working terms and conditions, and then they stripped them from us because we were an alio. So we had to fight to start getting things back again after they stripped them for us. They took away our overtime rates, took away our public holiday rights, things like that. So it's always been a struggle, but now we'll come up to the last 18 months as a big thing because, I mean, predominantly I am supporting women, low paid women in the city, and it's like carers, cleaners and caterers. And then when the COVID pandemic hit us, that was quite a slap in the face. It was like, never mind Glasgow City Council, Scottish Government were just quite oblivious to actual social care workers out there in the streets. It's okay if you're in a clinical setting, etc. The NHS, I love them to bits, but the social care workers get forgotten about. And this is women that are out there, your mums, your sisters, your nieces, your nephews, whatever, they're all out there. And they're out there walking the streets at all weathers, at all times. If you all know that anyway, I don't need to say that. Okay, but the main thing is we've got this pandemic coming along, and as long as you were in a clinical setting, you were getting provided with protection. You were getting PPE. So first our struggle started with, that was it, we challenged the Scottish Government, and we got it on the 3rd of April. We managed to get masks, but not just any masks. It had to be type 2R masks, the ones that would protect you from the COVID, because it was an air transmissible infection. So again, it's the strength. You can only do these things with the strength of the workers. There's all these workers were, as in the strike, it was the strength in numbers, and that's where it goes. Anyway, we fought for that, but further down, just every month, there was something that we were constantly fighting for, because these women were classed as essential workers. They were recognised as professional workers as well, but again, who are being ignored for their safety and the safety of that of their families and stuff. So every month we had a struggle. And the final one came when the testing. So we had to actually take industrial action, an industrial ballot out. We balloted our members, consultative ballot for industrial action, to have the right to be tested every week, because we were doing face-to-face with your service users, as they'll call them. Just been a right struggle. But now, again, I've got another consultative ballot just put out 2 weeks ago, because the council, like they did in 2018, they started to play silly buggers again. So that's it. So they're sort of reneging on the negotiations of paying out the remaining equal pay settlement. So now we're halfway through. We've got a consultative ballot out, and that was with intention to strike. So I'll just be warning you all that equal pay strikers will probably be taken to the streets of Glasgow again in January, and that is all unions united, because all unions are in this together. Everyone has workers, all the low-paid workers, and it's just about our struggles. Again, I'm not very good, but that's it. Just as I say, life's just been a struggle, and I've been a voice. And I can just mention my colleague and comrade here, Frances. She's such a voice as well. We've got these women. This last 18 months has been just horrendous. Living with women crying on the phone. We don't put our phones down. Our services work 24/7, so we've never put the phones down. We're there. We're battling every day. We're battling for workers to get isolated, to be protected, all these things. Just an ongoing battle. So everyone's like that. And another thing I can add to the sort of green aspect, we have been fighting to get new cars. And as you'll see, or you've probably maybe read as well in the paper, they've ordered about 200 to 300 electric cars, but there's no charging points, so they're all sitting in car parks across the city, okay, which is ridiculous. And as you can see, these cars, which are the old Cordia cars, which they'll just not throw away, they're fit for the tip, they're still running about in the streets, and the fumes and everything are coming out of them. We actually had to have CO2 things fitted inside the cars because of the fumes that the carers were getting as well. So every day is a struggle in our profession. So thanks for listening anyway.
Sean was quite skillfully there connected the two themes in this meeting, which is solidarity with workers in struggle and the struggle for a different world under the headline of a Socialist Green New Deal, one where the working class gain instead of lose, and where the planet gains instead of being thrashed by the polluting profiteers. I do want to emphasise, before moving on to the next speaker, that the Scottish Socialist Party pledges to continue to give absolute 100% solidarity to any group of workers that are in struggle, like we've been doing with the cleansing staff, like we've done on the railways, whether it be the sleeper services or ScotRail or others, and the ferries and so on as well, of course. And we will also do that alongside our sisters primarily, some brothers I suppose, in the struggle for equal pay, when you have to hit the streets again to get justice on that ABC question of the quality of treatment. So be assured that we'll do everything we can, including using our magazine, the Scottish Socialist Voice, to publicise the case, to do interviews, to explain the issues to people outside the circles that meet and outside the workforce that's involved, when they don't always necessarily understand all the issues at first, and do everything we can in that regard to build the solidarity. So I just want to put that on record. I'll also mention that we're going to have the format where there's going to be all the speakers, and then we will open up for comments, questions, discussion. So don't panic, they'll get an opportunity to say or ask anything they want. Our next speaker is somebody involved in the, if you like, the other main theme of tonight's meeting, the struggle for socialist change instead of climate change. Because I don't know about you, I've actually, despite the years, been around for at least a couple of years in struggle, and it's an inspiration to see people, maybe even half, if not a smaller percentage of my age, coming out in such vast number, the likes of last Friday on the Youth Climate Day of Action, and again turning out in monsoon weather on the Saturday alongside the big people that took part in the struggle against the climate crisis. And it's really inspiring to see a young generation be shaped by the issue of their concern about the climate. And I'll not steal any thunder that Jamie might have, what he's going to say, but put it this way, there's a figure on the survey that 72% of young people who are asked are panic-stricken about whether the planet will survive in their lifetime. And there's also the response of the Tory government, which is to bring in a new law on their education legislation that's coming out shortly, which basically threatens to punish people for taking the likes of climate strike action and to fine the parents for encouraging them or allowing them to do it. That's the answer of the Tories. These new green Tories of Boris Johnson and so on, that's their plan of action towards young people. So therefore, it is a pleasure, even if they got somewhat challenged by the public transport system. We'll have to have a few tutorials on that before it's introduced to the pre-sales for Jamie. But Jamie O'Rourke is a quite new fighter in the cause for not just climate justice, but for socialism. And he stood in to speak, and it's to his credit to do so. Bear with him, it's the first time he's done public speaking, so over to Jamie.
As Richard said, it's my first time doing public speaking, so please bear with me. So I'm Jamie, I'm a student activist, I've been in the SSB for about a year and a half, before that, and I'm here to talk very briefly about the role of young activists in building in helping with the struggle for a socialist Scotland, socialist change rather than climate change. And so the reason that I think a lot of young people feel the need to get involved in politics, particularly now, is that, as Richard says, they do feel that the future's under threat. They're terrified, and they're terrified that the fact that the future isn't guaranteed, which is the truth of it. And if we don't make real change, it's supported by these young activists and listen to them, and listen to what they say, then it means worse future for a lot of us. And so again, as Richard was saying there, I was absolutely heartened by the display on Friday in Glasgow, and the protest, thousands of people, thousands of young people taking the streets to make their voices heard. And it's a testament to those young people that they stood out against all the ridicule for the media and for the press and from public figures. To make the voices heard is such an important issue, and I know it's an important issue. And again, which is why so many kids get skill for it. And this is something that we see again in the SSP doing our stalls. Recently, the series of various said stalls at universities, and the number one issue that's always been up to climate change. The same more than half of the students that we're talking about when they were making their concerns known is that was the main thing they were fighting about. Of course, fighting about it. And please bear with me. So I'm a student, as I said, but I'm also one class, and I know solely the importance of our desks speaking here today, what they're talking about, worker struggles and strike action, and that has to come hand in hand with climate reform and socialist climate reform, because climate reform that the capitalists have put forward as a solution is in fact no solution at all, and because it's going to hit your wallets, it's going to hit our wallets, the funds of working people rather than people that can actually afford to make this change. And that's why I feel, I think that's certainly why a lot of young people are coming to feel that socialism is a necessity, that social change is a necessity. Because we can't be paying for the problem that on the whole that we didn't break, we weren't going to do that, we're not making these big workflow decisions. And to sort of wrap up now, because it's a bit of a ramble, but I basically, the last sort of thing I'd like to leave with is, if you're a young person and you want people to get involved, it's incredibly important, and the welfare for it, it's vital, again, it's like what you believe in, and to do something to change.
Thanks very much, Chair. Not bad for making speech. Bad news is that we're speaking again, okay? Just let you go. During the meeting, Andy will put around the attendance sheet. Some of you have signed in already, but it's really important to try and keep in touch with each other, because I'm sure other speakers that remain will make the point we need to unite, we need collective action, we need all the different strands of struggle brought together. So part of the purpose of the attendance sheet is to make sure we keep in touch with each other and alert you to other things that are happening. So if Andy puts that down, just please print as clearly as you can your name and the other details that's on the thing, just that you have attendance. And it's not for special grants, despite the jokes we made to somebody else. The next speaker, it's a particularly proud moment for us in the SFP and for me personally to introduce the next speaker, because nowadays you've got a position where a lot of people would say, well, the trade unions, what have they ever done for us? Now, if they pause for a minute and think about it, you wouldn't have any rights if it wasn't for generations of trade unions banded together and fighting back against the capitalist employers. But that aside, there's a grain of truth in the fact that too many union top leaders sell their jerseys. That's a Scottish term, I learned it. They sell the jersey far too readily. They give up and surrender in the face of any battle from the employer. But there's some very honourable exceptions. And our next speaker, Sarah Willing, who is the General Secretary of the Bakers and Food and Allied Workers Union, is an exception. Sarah is a genuine, a sincere, a committed fighter on behalf of her members. It might be a relatively small union, but by Christ is a determined one that's prepared to stand up for its membership. And on a personal note, I'll say this. It's the first time in person we've met, although we've been in regular contact. And that's because Sarah, when I was sacked by multinational, Sarah did more to publicise my case and to fight solidarity with me than the national leadership of my own union, a different union. And that's a sad fact in one respect, but it's a thing that I'm eternally grateful for, that she stood up for us and stood up for the rights of workers. So we're going to introduce Sarah Woolley, General Secretary of the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union.
Thanks, Richard, for those really kind words. You know, I wasn't doing anything that I wouldn't expect anybody else now to do, and I would do it again tomorrow. It's absolutely fantastic to be here, and oh my God, we're together. We're actually together in person. I'm not looking at you at those squares on the screen. It's amazing, and you'll notice from my accent that I'm not from up here. I've travelled up today, and it's grand to be in my first meeting. And Jamie, you know, if I had got to rely on the public transport, I'd have still been finding myself here. You know, it's only thanks to my colleague Mark bringing me that I was here on time and early, in fact. And it's brilliant, isn't it, that so many people are coming together around the COP, because we know that we're not welcome there. Our class will never be one of them. But we're meeting together regardless to decide and discuss what we can do collectively as the 99% to make the changes that we need. Because we can't rely on the world leaders. You know, you only have to look at the promises they made back in 2015 when they were in Paris enjoying a life of luxury there that seems like they've came to go, thanks to COVID. But they made all these promises about, you know, the Paris Agreement that, in our opinion, didn't go far enough. They've not achieved it. So all these promises they're going to make this week, we know they're not going to achieve them either, even though, you know, they can find the time to fly across the world and stay in swanky hotels and get free public transport whilst they're here. And if our leaders are anything to go by, These are going to be promises made by people that aren't going to be impacted by them, don't really give a toss about the impact that happens to us and our class, but they'll just decide what needs to be done and make some measurements to get there. You know, Johnson is never going to have been in a position where he's had to make the decision whether he heats his home or whether he feeds his children. He's not going to have had to have gone without food or, you know, ate less than he should have done so that other people can eat. Or even asked family and friends to support him. Never mind have gone to a food bank like Baker's Food and Allied Workers members have over the last 18 months. So don't forget, you know, as Mandy said, they're key workers too. But we did a survey a few months ago, and they were the stories that were coming back to us. Our members are being paid through a global pandemic to keep the nation fed. Johnson's never going to go back to experience that, never mind any of the rest of them. He's never going to have skirted around poverty or be plunged into it. That's why it's so easy for him to decide to whip the £20 universal credit uplift off people, because he doesn't know what it's like to have to go and queue outside a food bank. Yet they will happily decide the way forward for our country and countries around the world to be greener, whatever the cost to us. And you only have to look at the track record of Tory trade changes to see the devastating impacts that it can have. And they close the mines, and they don't support the steelworks. And I appreciate that they're not green economy and not what we want for the future. They didn't put anything in place to support those workers and left those towns. I mean, the villages, the pit villages near me, are still devastated, decades and decades on, because they didn't put anything in place to support the workers. They didn't put anything in place to make sure that those communities could still continue to thrive and the skills that those people have in those workplaces could be utilised. They didn't ensure that they had decent unionised jobs to go into. And this lot aren't going to do any better. They're not going to do any different because they're not interested. They're more interested in battering the unions and trying to make sure that we know where we belong in society. We haven't got environmental justice without social justice. And that's why we, as trade unions and our class, need a seat at the table. Trade unions are the voice of working people, and that's why we need to be heard. So that our members don't bear the brunt of the changes that they're inevitably going to make. And we need to work together. You know, we have debates and disagreements, and the climate activists don't necessarily always understand what the trade unions are trying to do. The trade unions don't always understand what each other's trying to do. But we do need to be better at working together as one whole movement, working hard to understand each other's demands and where they come from, but also understand the challenges that we face, so that we are stronger. Because, you know, I've mentioned the 99%, and sometimes it's a throwaway comment, but when we get together, we are bloody powerful. And that is why they're doing the damn best to keep us under the thumb, because they know that. We are the people who will enact the change, and that's why meetings like this are great. I truly am humbled to be sharing a platform with strikers, with first-time speakers, with people that have been dealing with struggle all their life, because we're the people that need to enact change. We're the leaders that can make a difference and draw people in. And it's really great to be, well, we know, the Tories aren't going to do it, and the Labour Party aren't going to do it either. You know, to be honest, they've not done so far, but it's great to be here with people that can enact that change. But the work's got to continue. It's all well and good coming to a meeting tonight and coming to a number of meetings over the last week and this week because we're around COP. But that's not enough. We've then got to go home and talk to our colleagues, talk to our kids, talk to our communities, and organise around climate justice, organise around, you know, the right to food, organise around struggling workers, to put pressure on together. Because, you know, we've had conversations with colleagues from the RMT around how we can work together, because you might not think, you know, tube workers and train staff have got anything in common with bakers. But actually, we all get up at stupid o'clock in the morning and have to travel to work in the transport. Or have to rely on taxis, or we're in danger of people are just bloody rude to us on a day-to-day basis. So we need to be working together across the movement standing in solidarity, you know, when there's struggle, and the Bakers Union stand in absolute solidarity with yourselves, with your members, Chris's members when he gets here, and everybody else in struggle, because that's what we do as a movement. We stand together, we fight together, we win together, to make sure that our children and generations to come have a world that's fit to live in, and that's not run by the Tories, determined to push us further and further into poverty. So I will leave it at there. Solidarity, I think we're the best.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Well, already I think we agree that we've had a great array of speakers, all representing different strands of the same struggle, really, different sections of the working class. And one stark contrast I would point out is that there's been a survey of COP26 delegates carried out, and it's been discovered that there's more of them who have links with fossil fuel companies than actually represent any single state. That's a fact. So the biggest country at COP26 are big oil, big gas, big polluters in reality. It's not a country. It's a capitalist institution that's designed to crush our lives for the sake of profit. And in contrast here, we have people who are involved in their own separate and together struggles for a better world. And I think one of the things also COVID has demonstrated is the simple point: there is such a thing as the working class. As I said in the picket line in a speech on my teeth were chatting with COVID yesterday morning, Saturday morning, in the cleansing strike, and it was raining. Then it's the cleansing staff, it's the supermarket workers, it's the care staff, it's the people in the hospitals and the care homes, it's the ones that provide the utilities, it's the posties, it's the people who produce food, it's people like that and hundreds of other categories of workers that make society function. It's not the billionaires, it's not the big polluters who have polluted the earth and left a terrible legacy for future generations. And in fighting back, working class people need political representation as well. Now, I don't want to indulge in comment that is or isn't appropriate, but the Bakers Union, represented here by Sarah and Mark, the Scottish organiser, very welcome here tonight as usual, then they have recently decided after a ballot of their members to break their link to disaffiliate with the Labour Party of Sir Keir Starmer. And frankly, I welcome that, because good socialists and trade unions in the Labour Party, as far as I'm concerned, are political prisoners. And I think political prisoners should be released. So it's a good step, and I hope therefore it gives you the greater opportunity to stand up for people without having to mind your P's and Q's in terms of your links with the Labour Party. And we certainly work shoulder to shoulder as we did anyway when you were still affiliated. So it's not a quid pro quo. The next speaker represents a socialist alternative, represents the Scottish Socialist Party, was an MSP, a member of the Scottish Parliament for a number of years, representing people in Lothians, as the national co-spokesperson of the SSP, Colin Fox, who will elaborate a little bit more about what we stand for on these key issues of poverty and pollution and the socialist alternative. So, Colin.
Thank you very much, Richie, for that kind introduction. I have to say, earlier on, when Richie mentioned that the next speaker was half his age, I thought I was off with that. Give me a little more time. I wanted to also to say, the eyes of the world are in Glasgow. The eyes of the world are in Glasgow. And people here who know the history of Glasgow, not for the first time. This is a city that's had its eyes the whole world on it many times before. We're here in Maryhill Community Centre. I have to say this is the self-allocation of previous SSP governments that Richie and I were at. And I also remember one of my earliest visits to Maryhill Community Centre was during the anti-poll tax struggle in the late 1980s, where the eyes of the world were in Glasgow again, because this city was at the forefront of the opposition to Thatcher's flagship policy, the hated poll tax. all those many years ago, and people who were there then, though me and Richie have not aged a single day since then. I wanted to say that I'm also proud to stand here alongside my colleagues Sarah, Mandy, Shona and Jamie, who essentially are reiterating the message to this meeting that these are workers in struggle. These are people who are struggling and understand and reinforcing the message that all progress comes from struggle. All progress comes from struggle, and without struggle there is no progress. That's what we've learned. Those of us who are socialists and who are unionists and fighters, people seeking after justice, here in 2021. It's also what we were taught 100 years ago when John McLean was stalking these locales with the same message 100 years ago at the height of Red Clydeside. Again, a famous part of our history. John McLean, the famous fighter for an independent socialist Scotland, and I defy anybody today in 2021 to tell me that that message is not as relevant as it's ever been. It is, and it's part of the Scottish Socialist Party started. I'm also happy to say, on behalf of my colleagues and colleagues up here, it's nice to look at this audience and see so many veterans of the Monsoon March of last Saturday. The famous Monsoon March through Glasgow, where 100,000 crooked souls marched the long march from Kelvin Grove Art Gallery to Glasgow Green and are still here to tell the tale. Maybe the others who are not going to tell the tale are suffering a bit of flu, got the night nurse already. But I think that was a marvellous demonstration, a marvellous reflection of all which is great about this city. The Monsoon March of the time, and I have to say, I bring you the sad news, something that we probably knew, that under global warming, I bring you the very sad news that Glasgow will be wetter. And Saturday that probably didn't feel as if it was at all possible. But that's probably another reason we have to fight against global warming. So it's a pleasure to see you here. On the serious business in front of us, the United Nations has said that if current trends continue, then the core temperature in the world will exceed the Industrial Revolution temperature by 2.7 degrees. And whatever else you learn about the facts and figures from this conference, that is catastrophic for humanity. A 2.7 degree rise in climate the core temperature of the Earth is catastrophic. And the United Nations Secretary General, Guterres, said before this conference started that if things don't change, that's where we're heading by 2100. That is a catastrophic conclusion for the United Nations General Secretary to draw and to put in front of us all. And I have to say that we have, in this meeting and all the meetings I've been in the last week in stalls with Jamie and other comrades, and on Saturday and on Friday when we were there with Greta Thunberg and others, there's a very serious and sober mood in this city. Because if it's 2.7 degrees and we're heading for catastrophe, then why on earth is there only 120 of the 197 countries in the United Nations represented here in Glasgow? Where are the other 77? And those 120, only 12 have agreed to commit themselves to net zero by 2050. So of 197, only 12 have committed themselves to the idea that 2050 is when we reach a carbon zero maximum. I think that's a wake-up call. That's a sober piece of information that this conference probably in the last week is dealing with. Those 12 countries have committed to 2050, and I'll come back to them in a second, but I'm sure none of you have missed the fact that neither China, nor Russia, nor Saudi Arabia, nor Australia, nor Turkey, nor Brazil, nor South Africa are amongst them. They've committed themselves to 2060, and India has committed itself to 2070. These are sober facts and figures put in front of us, and you have to say, even the 12 who might find themselves susceptible to gloating, the reality is that more and more promises from the United Nations are one thing, delivery is quite another. The last COP conference that took place 3 years ago, wasn't it, 2 years ago, in Madrid, committed itself to finding £100 billion for financing the developing world to fight against climate change then. And they've missed their target. Again, a common occurrence with so many of these. So it's one thing setting targets, it's another thing delivering them. And I have to say, the British government of Boris Johnson, and my colleagues and comrades have mentioned them already. Boris Johnson, I was in London a couple of weeks ago, my 30th wedding anniversary down there in London. I know you think he's that young, he couldn't possibly be married for 30 years, but it's true, ladies and gentlemen. With that leash, Boris Johnson was up at a global investment conference to get global investors, to invest in climate change amelioration issues. And he announced on behalf of the British government that the British government would make available £12.5 billion to tackle climate change over the next 5 years. So that's £2.5 billion a year. And that money will come out of the foreign aid budget. And it will only be deployed if Britain continues to grow over the next 5 years. So there's 4 caveats within a sum of money that is peanuts, quite frankly. And comrades who know from the Scottish Socialist Party's previous campaign for a £12 an hour living wage, we stand up and we go, the national living wage is peanuts. We're the peanuts party. We identify peanuts when we see it. And £12.5 billion from Boris Johnson is frankly peanuts. You're not going to make a blind bit of difference to the challenge that's in front of the world with those kind of figures. And Boris Johnson at that conference said, we can build back greener without a hair shirt in sight, was a quote. Without a hair shirt in sight. And John Harris, writing in The Guardian last week, was amongst those who ridiculed the claim by saying there's going to have to be big changes to everyday life for every single one of us. There's going to have to be big changes to what we eat, big changes to how we travel, and big changes to how we heat our homes. And he's right, isn't he? And Boris Johnson is planning us by suggesting we can somehow continue, no hair shirts, no changes, nothing, carry on regardless, like Captain Mannering from Dad's Army. It's rubbish. It's offensive rubbish. It's ridiculous. And Megan Green, writing in the Financial Times last week, said that leaders like Boris Johnson need to be upfront about the costs of saving the planet and the short-term economic consequences of fighting climate change. And she made the point that renewable investment at this stage cannot fill the gap that fossil fuels currently consists for the next 25 years. And she made the point, she made a comparison, saying that the global supply side shock of decarbonisation could put the world economy on par, on the same journey as we saw in 1974 with the quadrupling of the oil price and the catastrophic changes that forced upon the economy at that time. And she also made the point that as things currently stand, it's quite obvious that global leaders, Boris Johnson, Joe Biden and others, plan to use public resources will be diverted from where they're going to be just now. So that's home care staff, people's housing, health and education. Those resources will be diverted from there towards climate change. That's what they're saying. And we say no, absolutely not. The fact is there's going to have to be extra resources put to fighting that, and politicians have to be honest about the political costs of transition, and the Scottish Socialist Party agrees with that. I noticed, and I hope you did too, that the Chinese negotiator is here. So Xi Jinping is not here in Maryhill tonight. I have to bring you that news. He's a speaker who perhaps we wouldn't have anyway, but he's not managed to make this meet. The chief negotiator from China cast doubt on whether or not the 1.5 degree target that they're set is achievable. He thinks it's already too late. And I think when you look at it, the reason there was 100,000 people marched through Glasgow on Saturday afternoon is because they're demanding the governments do far more. They do far more to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels for heating, for transport, for industrial production. They're demanding that we cut emissions to net zero right across the world. They're demanding that we're having to move towards a plant-based diet. That'll shock people in Glasgow, Jerry. The idea of more fruit and vegetables and plant-based diets. Mind you, some of the pies in Glasgow probably don't listen to them anyway. But they're going to have to move to a plant-based diet because the methane emissions from meat production and from dairy are perhaps the most lethal of all the emissions that we confront. And we're going to have to halt deforestation, and that means planting more trees. And I think the Scottish Socialist Party's message is These are the minimum requirements as far as decisive action is concerned. No less will do, and quite frankly, much more may be necessary. So the Scottish Socialist Party's attitude is we are scientific socialists. We look for evidence, we look for proof, and the evidence is clear that all the evidence shows that there are grave dangers facing every single one of us. There are grave dangers facing 9 billion people on the planet unless we act decisively, and we do so now. And the principal message of the Scottish Socialist Parties and the climate change global warming debate is that we insist, yes, we insist, that all the solutions that come forward to solve global warming have to make working class people's lives better, not worse. That applies here in Maryhill, that applies throughout Scotland, throughout Britain, it applies throughout the world. We've got to ensure that the solutions come forward, make sure that 9 billion people across the planet's lives are better as a consequence, rather than we somehow wear a hair shirt, or that it's only the rich that can benefit, the rest of us are just going to have to suffer up. Well, frankly, we reject that conclusion, and we insist that the majority of the population of the world, 9 billion people, sub-Saharan Africa, who live in less than $100 a year, people who struggle, as my comrades have said before, to put bread on the table, to put shoes on their feet in the middle of wet days that we had in Glasgow Saturday, their needs are uppermost as far as the Scottish Socialist Party is concerned. So the many initiatives that can be taken to combat global warming, the question is, and here I'm going to use a bit of Latin, Jenny. Stand by, Latin. I done Latin school as an altar boy. If only the world would change in this direction, I could be the next school. But we'll leave that to one side. The question is, qui bono, ladies and gentlemen? Who benefits from these change? This is what working people have to look at. With the solutions that come forward, we go, who benefits here? The working class people benefit, and the masses of the working population benefit, then we're in favour of it. But if it's global investment analysts, if it's the Baillie Giffords, the investment managers in Edinburgh, the second biggest owners of Tesla cars after Elon Musk, if it's solutions to help these people, if the investments in renewables and a plant-based diet and renewable electricity and electric cars, if the investment is simply to make more profits for Elon Musk, then you're not on. The profits have got to be redistributed. The wealth has got to be redistributed to those who need it the most. The women who are entitled to equal pay. They've been entitled to equal pay since the very beginning. But legally been entitled to equal pay in Britain since 1971, when the Ford machinists went on strike to ensure that men and women got the same pay for work of equal value. These injustices are what have to change. These injustices have to be eradicated. And capital, these investment companies, the global investment funds, are investing huge sums of money in electric cars, huge sums of money in renewable energy, huge sums of money in plant-based diets to make profits for themselves. That's the key question here. You're not going to enlist the support, however, of the 9 billion people who need to buy into this in solidarity with one another. We need to buy into it each. You're not going to serve their interests if the profits go to the tiny elite that's done so in the past. And that's why the Scottish Socialist Party supports a Socialist New Deal to improve the lives of working people, to remodel our economy so that we take all workers, all people with us, that all those people with skills, for example, in the development of fossil fuels, all those men and women who worked in the North Sea, who laid cables, who were in rigs during the worst weather imaginable in the North Sea, right through the world. Those skills have got to be deployed for socially useful purposes and deployed to ensure that in a post-fossil fuel environment, those skills are still put to the benefit of the rest of us. And their paying conditions and their quality of life is also protected. That's what transition means. We transition from fossil fuels to renewables, and we take everybody with us. Nobody is left behind. Don't let the steelworks in Maryhill close. Steel workers left behind. Coal mines in Fife and South Ayrshire left behind. Yorkshire left behind. No! We insist that everybody is brought together, that we all make the same journey towards the development of new remodeled economy that we can. And it's obvious, I think, the comrades in the union movement know that the STUCs produce documentation that shows there are literally millions of new jobs that could be created. This isn't about jobs being lost, this is about remodelling to make sure that there are more jobs. And I must say in passing to Comrade Shona, my mother passed away 2 years ago from dementia. She was given fantastic care with the home care services in Lanarkshire. And we've seen the Scottish Socialist Party campaign during the COVID era that Sarah mentioned. We were campaigning at the forefront of it for a national care service in Scotland that's free, that's publicly owned, that's universally available and is quality befitting of the 21st century. And that means paying care workers like Shona's brothers and sisters and colleagues, principally sisters, I have to say, a £15 an hour living wage, which is £3 more than the 12. Why? Because a third of people, third of women, leave that service every year because of the paying conditions. There needs to be a premium, not just to stop them leaving, but to draw in more young men and young women into the service to provide for the 21st century. As we're all getting older and dementia ravages the populations, you need more personal care. And that's a growth industry, no question about it. I make no apologies for mentioning it in the context of a climate change meeting, because it's also part of what the Scottish Socialist Party and what I believe a Socialist New Deal has to look at. But there's two things I wanted to say in finishing, Richie, which is to draw your attention to two key proposals that we in the Scottish Socialist Party have championed in particular for more than 10 years now, that we believe can go a long way towards solving the problem that global warming poses, that can redistribute global wealth and at the same time improve the lives of working people everywhere. And the first one of those is the introduction of free public transport in Scotland, because it was Scottish Socialist Party MSPs like myself, way back in 2005, who put forward and laid in front of the Holyrood Parliament proposals to introduce free public transport in Scotland, to give people a better alternative to their car. You want to get people out of their cars, give them a better alternative. Free buses, free trams, free underground, free trains. Have you seen the price of a train ticket? You need a mortgage to travel by train in this country. Make it free, you encourage people to use it. You encourage people to get out their cars. I have to say this, look, I'm wearing my hair shirt, I drive a car. I'm Colin, I drive a car. It's like a car owner. But the reality is, the last week I've spent driving through from Edinburgh to Glasgow with the SSP van called Vantonio Gramsci. Anyway, driving through on the Edinburgh City bypass, miserable experience, stuck in traffic for ages. You get to the M8, miserable experience, stuck in traffic for an hour. You get into the city, you can't park it. Where am I going to dump it? And he directs me down to a car park, dump for £6 an hour. The reality is, that doesn't take difficult. It's not difficult to wean me away from that. You give me a better alternative, especially if I've got 10,000 leaflets and voices and petitions and placards to carry, then I'll take it. And I think the idea that we produce free public transport is an idea whose time has come. An idea whose time has come. And in 2005, the Scottish Socialist Party argued and drew attention to the fact that the Belgian city of Hasselt, H-A-S-S-E-L-T, and he's writing this down, you know while I'm speaking, they introduced free public transport in that city in the year 2000 to draw pollution levels down in that city. And we mentioned it then. Subsequently, this is an initiative that's been introduced in several American cities in the downtown area. In fact, on Saturday, I think it was, might have been Friday, a woman who's over here for COP26 from New York City told us, and it turned out to be true because I checked it, that at New Year time, public transport in New York City is free at New Year time. New York City, one of the biggest cities in the world, free public transport. Now that happens to be an initiative they've introduced to try and discourage drink driving with Christmas parties. But there, yeah, free public transport is just in the downtown area of New York City. And if you've been following it, I'm sure those comrades in the Scottish Socialist Party have done, you know that last year, Luxembourg introduced free public transport. And last month, the island of Malta announced that it's introducing free public transport from next October. So this isn't just an idea whose time has come. The truth of the matter is, come on, Scotland, what's keeping you? We put forward this idea 10 years ago. This is an idea that we need today. And you say, okay, so what does Nicola Sturgeon say? Well, she says the same as Tavish Scott said in 2005 when we had a debate in the Scottish Parliament. And she says, oh no, Colin, it's too dear. It's too dear. It would cost £500 million. Woo! £500 million free public transport in Scotland. And I remember in the debate saying, Tavish, you're wrong. You're wrong, Tavish. I just like to say that anyway because it's usually true. Tavish, you're wrong. It would cost £1 billion. That's what it would have cost in 2005 because Tavish was the sharpest back in the he was a liberal. And he made the point of forgetting that if you introduce free public transport, you need more buses. You need more infrastructure. You need interchanges, etc. So we pointed out to them, it would have been a fair cost, isn't it? No, it's no 500 million, it's $1 billion. And it's still a good idea. And you know what? If you introduce free public transport, you reduce the pollution, therefore you lose the cost to the NHS of people who are breathing in crappy air. You also reduce the number of accidents in the motorway. You also reduce the congestion in every major city in the country, which reduces your economic growth. And so you can reduce that by a few hundred million. But maybe, nonetheless, the point we made to Tavish Scott is Lord Stern, who was the first president of the governmental panel on climate change, famously said when he was put on the chart, the cost of food for him stood here. He said the cost of doing nothing is the most expensive option of all. And it is absolutely true, isn't it? The cost of doing nothing is the most expensive option. And if we'd introduced free public transport way back in 2005, when the Scottish Socialist Party insisted on it, and I'm sorry to say, Richie, I bring you the sad news, the Greens voted against it then, because they thought it would mean more diesel buses, etc. Well, I thought that was a mistake. Subsequently, they changed their mind. So even she who comes last to Jesus is welcome. So the Greens now support it, and it's a good idea. And I think the Scottish Socialist Party has promoted this as a centrepiece of a climate change proposal. And the second proposal that I mentioned earlier of the two, the Scottish Socialist Party is adamant that we want to see returned, and I use the word returned, we want to see returned to public ownership, the oil industry, the gas industry, the electricity generating industry, and the renewables industry in this country returned to public hands. How dare Iberdrola, Scottish Power's parent company, Spanish company, they own Scottish Power. They own the wind turbine, the biggest wind turbine wind farm in Britain is in Eastern Pride at the Ferry Girls. They own it, the air is free, the wind is free, the tides are free, the land is free, but private companies sell it back to us, privatise it, sell it back to us. We want to see all those industries return to public hands to ensure that the profits that are generated go to build the council houses in Glasgow, Dundee and Aberdeen, Yorkshire and everywhere else that people so desperately need, to provide better care for our mums and dads, to provide better opportunities for young people, rather than just increasing the profits of Iberdrola. So I have to say, the Scottish Socialist Party advocates free public transport and returning to public ownership those industries that were stole for us way back in the day under Thatcher. And I have to say, the conclusion that we draw, as I said before, our message is that all the solutions that come forward have to ensure that working class people's lives are better throughout the world. And in turn, working people like us have to be alert to the threat that global warming poses. And we have to scrutinise all those proposed solutions that come forward from other people at COP and elsewhere to ensure that they benefit us rather than disbenefit us. And I have to say that's the essence of the Scottish Socialist Party and the socialist message about climate change. So I finally wanted to say that if you agree with that and the general thrust of it, then if you've not already done so, you should join the Scottish Socialist Party and campaign for a free public transport network, for public ownership, for the redistribution of wealth, which is increasingly, have to say, almost a revolutionary demand, because wealth has been redistributed in the wrong direction. And it's been redistributed in the wrong direction for the last 25, 30, 40 years. So we've got to stop the world, if you like, spinning in that direction away from us and start it spinning in the opposite direction. That's what the socialist message is. And I think you have to say, Why should we join the Scottish Socialist Party? This is not complicated. First reason is because socialists should be in a socialist party, not pretending that a party that isn't a socialist party will somehow, sometime, magically become one. That never works. It's never worked. Socialists should be in a socialist party. And the other reason is because working class people like us need to be aware of the threat that global warming poses and be aware that the solutions that we want to see have to be fought for. The comrades at the top table made clear the struggle is what we're about, and that's how we get our change. We change things by struggle. As I once took courage from the great slogan that Antonio Gramsci used with the 1930s in the face of 1920s and 30s in the face of the fascist Mussolini, and he made it clear, la lotta continua. La lotta continua translated into English, the struggle continues. The struggle is everything. And the SSP believes that in power. Thank you very much.
Before I introduce the next speaker, a very simple housekeeping announcement. It's that anybody who's lost a bus pass stroke train ticket, I don't know which it is exactly, it's been handed in at the reception. So if you've lost a ticket for travel, then volunteer to see it. Now, we reject the order of speakers for a very good reason, because as a working class socialist party, the SST is in the thick of it, trying to build solidarity for people that are fighting back for their own rights and the rights of other people. The solidarity of working class people is one of the themes that we've already had tonight. Before we open up for discussions and questions and comment, we're taking our final speaker, who has taken the trouble to come tonight to speak to us, even though I know for a fact that like every other day for weeks on end, Chris has been on picket lines in the early hours of the morning, because sometimes we're there myself, I know what it's like in this weather. He's been involved in negotiations. He was involved in an extremely lively members meeting in a monsoon mass meeting in George Square this afternoon that I happened to be at. He's involved in meeting members of his own union in their work depot while we were starting this, which is why he's been delayed. And Chris is somebody who, to me, epitomises two things. One, the fact that if you've got working class fighters prepared to give a lead, workers will take action in their own self-defence if they're confident of the leadership provided. And number two, that is an utterly false choice presented to us, that we have to choose between a decent job and clean air. Because the council in Glasgow, like the Scottish Government itself, is trying its damnedest to appear green, to greenwash itself for the purposes of the world media during COP26. And what do they do in reality? They decide that they want to cut back, like their predecessors in the Labour Run Council, I have to add, to cut back on the staffing levels in the cleansing service and make a misery for the lives of those who remain in that workforce. And they decide to keep them on miserable pay. And then they decide to threaten them with use of scab labour, using Tory anti-trade union laws in order to crush the strike. And it took the courage, the determination, and the leadership of people like Chris and the GMB organiser Sean, who's here, to keep those workers together and to fight for improvements in their conditions. So with a great warmth and a welcome, Chris Mitchell, convener of the Cleansing Workers.
I do apologise for the fancy dress, but that's the teaching tonight as well before I came here. Before I had to go to the picket line, obviously a night shift over at the Pullman D depot, because at 12 o'clock tonight, their strike action finishes. So I have to go and show a bit of solidarity, camaraderie for the guys over there, who's been absolutely fantastic, standing in all sorts of weathers, as Richie says there. Extremely difficult 8 days for everybody, to be honest with you. I'm proud of the stands that these workers made, the bullying culture that's been descended on the council, the derogatory pay rise that was offered by COSLA, and the lack of respect for every cleansing worker. Why, and I'll say it and make it clear, why council leaders and higher management, I keep saying it, I'll say it before, it's like an upside down Christmas tree. We seem to be at the bottom there, and everybody's at the top. And you know what? They had enough. And they stood up to these bullies and intimidators and people that think they're the big S and they're Gucci shoes, and they've had enough. So I'm proud of the workers, what they've done, what they've achieved. For years, I've been involved with this for nearly 30 years. Oh, you're saying I'm a good looking young guy, honestly. 30 years involved with the cleansing. 30 years I've been involved as a 16-year-old boy in the cleansing department. I'm now 45. So I've got a lot of experience in it. I've experienced a lot of hardship in it. And a lot of these people that I represent are facing hardship. They're in food banks. They can't afford to come to their work because of the low wages. And they're treated with complete contempt. You know what? They've had enough there. It's the last thing in any trade union's mind to take anybody out of industrial action. We've got a civic pride of this city to keep it clean. It's a health and safety issue that they forced us into a corner and our workers came out fighting. And that's what this is, fighting. Low paid workers have come out and made their stands to say enough is enough. Talk about COP26, a massive part of COP26 is the fact that we participate in recycling. We pick up hundreds of tons of thousands of waste every single day to help the environment. But during COP26, for the new people are coming here, world leaders and delegates been in the city chambers. The SCCC talked about climate change. They were making horrendous cuts in the recycling services. They were taking tons of waste away that you recycle, take time out today and putting it in a hole. That's bad for the environment, and that's exactly what is happening there. And it's ordinary cuts and a statutory service. 1.3 million rats are now decided in this city because of cuts. Leptospirosis, wheel disease, we face these conditions every single day as workers. We've got a civic duty to look after news as the citizens in this country. We're not to blame for this. They're to blame. We're to blame for this. And we've had enough. I'd like to thank everybody for their support. It's been inspirational. The public's been inspirational. World leaders that came here have been on the picket line speaking to us. Unions for all the globe of changes and showed their support, and also the activists are here because they know the importance of these workers. And they'll tell you the horror stories that people face on these picket lines. Honestly, horror stories, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And the people who run this city and this country should be ashamed of themselves. Absolutely ashamed of themselves. When people walk by people on the picket line and doing overtime, earning a lot of money, with low paid workers standing there for a better future, but everybody. And it is shameful, and it will never be forgotten, by the way, never be forgotten. The respect is now gone now. And I need to go now, face all these individuals in the morning, and try and put something back into this city, to get this city clean again. But you know what? I've seen something I never thought would happen in this city. As I said, these workers have now stood shoulder to shoulder, in camaraderie and solidarity with everybody. And I think it was a long time coming. It's a long time coming. I don't apologise for the disruption in the service, right enough, but no doubt these individuals will go and they will get their civic duty to get this city back to a good state, a sanitation one for better, so we can move forward for the future. But the ball's firmly in their court now. The ball's firmly in their court. They need to treat these workers with respect. And a bit of dignity is going to come with these workers because it's absolutely shameful. The conditions we work in are shocking because of cuts in the service, especially over the last 4 years. The facilities that we give back people dinner in are deplorable. There's something for the 1970s. That's a fact. There's holes in the ceiling. You're sitting, sharing your dinner with a rat in a depot. We might pick up rubbish, but we don't deserve to go back and sit in rubbish. That is a fact. And it's now coming to an end now. I spoke to somebody tonight. They're already in conversation with this man tonight who earns nearly £100,000 and doesn't stay in this city. But he works in this city. He makes cuts in this city. And he said to me, you're taking the trade union back to 1970. I'm sorry, I'm sitting in a building for 1970. That is a fact. Buckets with the water coming in, holes in the ceiling, trying to get the proper PPE, the fundamental thing, PPE. Take me the older generation with contempt and still making horrendous cuts in a service that is a statutory requirement. They call it sufficiency savings, we call it cuts. But the cuts don't start at the top, they start at the bottom. They're filling and lining their own pockets and leaving the working class people that are sitting here today to rot and ruin. And it's due to be an end now. Because you know what? We stood together as workers, as the members of the public, as campaigners and activists, and I'm proud of these. Thank you very much. Solidarity, brothers and sisters.
Once again, an example of a real leader on the shop floor who prepared to fight for working class people who are proud to be shoulder to shoulder with them. Before I open up for any kind of questions or comments, which we're going to allow a period for, I want to remind you that if you haven't already, please sign the attendance list. The other nasty piece of information I have to convey is that I'm not on £100,000. None of this money will go to me, but we will have a collection during the course of the meeting or at the end of it in 2 ways, because this has cost us a substantial sum of money to organise this meeting. It takes a lot to print material. It takes, even though we get a decent printer to help us, but it's still big fees. It takes money to hire this hall. It takes money to put out the parking fees for Colin when he comes through to help us. It takes money to travel on the subway, because we're not COP26 delegates, we don't get it free, and all that kind of stuff to go out and advertise this meeting, and to try and use this meeting, as I said at the start. Chris wasn't here then, so we didn't hear this. The theme of this is twofold: solidarity with workers that are in struggle already, to build maximum unity and struggle, but also to struggle for a socialist Green New Deal that actually creates a planet and a country fit to live in, so that you don't have that false choice between a decent job and fresh air, whatever your own interest. So there'll be a collection. There's 2 ways you can give according to your ability or your wishes. One is in the tins that Andy will proffer you, and the other is I'm trying to catch up with this modern stuff, you see. There's a QR code on a leaflet on your seat, it should be anyway, and you just scan that, and that goes into the SSP's campaign fund. So if you're willing to give something, please do. And when I'm on a commercial break, although it's actually a political point, I would appeal to everybody to buy the book that I spent a number of long nights and days researching, writing, proofreading, and I dare you to find the 3 mistakes in it, because there are 3. Despite all that, there's a missing apostrophe, for example. But you can open that. But this book attempts to lay out in plain language a number of things. The level of the crisis that faces people and the planet that we live on. The causes of that crisis. The scale of it and the root causes. The dirty lies and cover-up by big business polluters for years, for decades, who have lied about the realities and hired scientists to help them lie about it as well. And then it also, by the way, tries to tear apart in passing contracts like net zero. You'll have to read it to see what I'm talking about. Net zero is a lie. It's a lie. It's a contract. It's an excuse for continuing to pump out pollution and say you'll fix it. So read all that, and more to the point, the fact that those spell out in fine detail, well-researched detail, that we don't have to choose between good jobs and decent air to breathe in. That you can have both. In fact, the only way you will have decent air to breathe in is through the creation of tens and hundreds of thousands of new green jobs. And some research from the likes of transition economics, the FTC, puts the figure of 367,000 new jobs. By the way, that's even though their ambitions are lower than ours. They don't call for free public transport, for example. So read all about it, as they say. Get a book. It's well worth £5, or at least £4.99, as it says on the cover. And buy it, sell it to others, not your copy, other ones. And get a few copies for your unions branch, or whatever. Some unions are already doing that, rather than on this platform, because the RFTs remember. And I know that's the fact. But it's worth the read because it's written aimed at working people and fighters for a society that has neither poverty nor pollution. So enough said of that. So anybody want to ask any of the speakers or make a general point, a quick point about anything, it's your chance now. We'll not drag this out, by the way, because people have long days and all that. But is there anybody who wants to ask anything or make any comment or whatever? Annie. Say who you are, by the way, I don't know who you are, but say who you are for others to know. Thanks.
I'm an American, I'm a socialist and the child development union, and I'm also part of trying against climate change. Alongside the other group that is another district, draw people's attention to this one. You can see that it's an update from the 2018 climate jobs. So the same climate jobs which was it kind of goes the green jobs can really think about the environmental jobs because all wonderful contributions tonight and thank you, but directed to the wonderful women who work with the equality pay. The climate jobs include their jobs from a national pay service because we want to look after people and planet. And we've got to respect people do the jobs as you described. So that's the only thing that's even missing from this project, is I would like to include a creative caring jobs. Now, within that, I want us to think about what we mean by carbon management, because we've described that the city council is not responding to what people want and what good conditions for workers. So on the public transport debate, when the public transport went into Edinburgh District Council, they didn't really make things much better for bus drivers. Bus drivers should decide how safe it is to drive on a day, certainly not 10-hour shifts. Bus drivers should decide what the roads look like. Care workers should decide how long it takes a person to get out of bed and breakfast instead of a time allocation. So what I'm asking for is in a consideration of public transport that we have worker control, that we have community control. And I invite you to overcome this work on the continent of economic democracy that we can fight for through our unions. Because the Scottish Government is certainly Westminster, the West Westminsters, or the City Council is not going to deliver the services that we deserve, want and need. And we need a measure of worker control and community control.
Thanks very much, Richie. My name is Hugh Cullen, and I'm the National Secretary of the Scottish Socialist Party, and I'm also a further education lecturer here in Scotland. I guess I want to say, first of all, thanks very much to everyone for coming along. And I guess I want to offer my complete support for the theme of the meeting, which is don't fight and you'll never win. I was unlucky enough this year to take part in the first strike action, and that was a strike action that took place against fire and new hire and other things. And although we won, we're very aware that some of the other, unions who are sort of fighting back against similar issues, unfortunately didn't win. And I'm sort of hopeful that doesn't put people off. I think that in our sector in education, we hear a lot from the Scottish Government about the COVID recovery being an education-led recovery, and yet that is undermined at every turn by disrespect for workers' rights. An SNP government, we are happy to let horrible practices like firing me hire sort of manifest in the public sector and private sector or whatever, not willing to step in and settle disputes like what we've seen with the disputes, which are represented on the table. Just like other workers in the public sector, education is also undermined by a lack of investment in public services. And I think the meeting tonight has been good at putting forward the idea that this has to be a worker-led recovery. And as we just heard from Annie, the SFP's model of democratic public ownership is not, not simply to nationalise bodies like ScotRail, which we think the SNP government are going to do next year. It involves putting the workers and the railway workers in charge of the company, because the railway workers know how trains work best. Lecturers and teachers understand education best, cleansing workers understand cleansing best, and so on. And democratic public ownership, redistribution of wealth, has to have the empowerment of working people, communities, and customers, and so on at its heart. So absolutely, the point of the meeting being, we heard from Colin a couple of the SSP's policies, which we like to offer to the climate movement, things like free public transport, democratic public ownership, energy, and so on. Frankly, the list is much, much longer than that. It covers a whole range of policies around housing, around retrofitting, and so on and so forth. But all of these things have to be fought on one floor. You can have a list lengthier arm. Frankly, the SSP has had a lot of these policies for coming up for 25 years. There's not a movement behind it. There's not an organised led struggle that will never happen. I'm sure people appreciate that.
My name's Chris, I'm an SSP member of the Glasgow branch and also Australia. So I'm firmly behind the policy for free public transport. Currently, I'm involved in the struggle across Glasgow, across Glasgow employees. Basically, I need to say that across Glasgow, the student job can get for too long. It's about time that men just stood up for them. Or likewise, publicly owned service. For the public, not for anybody else, not for any hot delegates. Certainly not for any hot delegates who put right to the front of you to travel on your electric buses that will sit at the end of 3 months, will use the best of the way and follow the buses through the city. Basically got the offer from the company, which is completely unsatisfactory. So it's maybe in the next couple of months, we see us what the commercial actually do. Also, that comes at a price. Representatives tell us to accept that. What forces uncategorically tell them it's unfair. Drivers will put their lives on the line for this pandemic. Last 18 months since drivers have self-isolated. My mates are still on COVID. They put themselves through the ringer. We lost a driver last week. Driver 20 years service. Good friend, good guy. Last week was a COVID. You put their lives on the line. Get people to their work. Get these officers to their work. They need to go. Get people to the shops to buy their groceries. Care needs, social needs, whatever you get friends. You're there at one night. 624/7 if you got that back as well. It's unfair. Us last governments tell us to turn around the road. You can have a 2.6% rise this year and a 2.6% next year. The aim of that is so we can bring two employees on the same rate of wage. It's completely understandable. It's something I get done. Do not hold everybody else line. Guys in that lockup, have been there since the long 60s, or the leaving. I know a guy can be 37 years in the job. Like, guy previously 37 years in the job. Like, often 4 years in the job. Not because of the retirement age, not because of the time to slow down. It's not enough. Not enough poor management, not enough great stuff. don't say that Untitled stood up for sales, and more stood up and the last one. Excuse me, the marketplace, please come join us in solidarity with them.
So we're going to take another couple of points or questions before asking any of the speakers who wish to say a few words just for 2 to 3 minutes or whatever before we close the meeting. All right. So, Mike, Hi.
Thank you. Just a small point to important point that speakers really important. Description of how things are in transport. 9 o'clock, Wednesday, day after tomorrow, public transport action organised by the local campaign for free buses across Greater Glasgow and joined by organisers of the International Workers' Federation and secretaries. So do try and turn out at 9 o'clock George Square on Wednesday, even if it's a monsoon. Thank you.
Go on.
It goes ahead.
Before ask Mark and then we'll get any quick replies. Not there.
I just wanted to ask, I'm not really calling to the great amount of detail but I need to know if there's been any discussion around sort of military factors that has on climate. I watched the video yesterday from Government News about British military, for example, how they contribute of greenhouse gases basically through their activity as opposed to the activity of everyday people. So whether there's been any focus or discussion on that. Yeah, very much. It's more of a question.
It's been.
Thanks, Richie. I'm Mark Sandman, the SSP branch. And also work in Glasgow City Council and my school in Glasgow City branch. I'd like to ask Sean and Chris, if they don't mind, about the equal pay dispute or unequal pay dispute with Glasgow City Council now begin to backtrack on what they previously agreed to pay workers for the unequal pay that they've been experiencing since as far back as 2003, 2004, a long time, and how that from the equal pay dispute, the council then agreed to evaluate the jobs of how many 26,000 council workers. So with the way the council have been behaving recently towards Cordia and the guys that clean the bins, etc., empty the bins and keep the city clean, the use of any faith in the ongoing job evaluation scheme, when one day the council will come to us and say to the 26,000 of us that this is what your new salary would be? Do you have any faith in that scheme?
Okay, well, I'm going to ask, sorry, that's it. Pardon? Sorry, no, the man here. I have to draw this to a conclusion then by this because of time. So,
higher what was being higher, you know, the stuff paid off. And what we do is we try to pensions, sick pay, anything, just like cutbacks, and that's the way the place is keep people in it. So I'm going to say,
I'm going to ask any speakers who want to do 2 or 3 minutes respond to what's being discussed. Certainly, as I said, with presidential.
Just obviously a good point that you made. Do you have any faith in the discriminatory process at this point? No, I don't. Job evaluation is going to go one time only. It's going to take people in, then going to take people up. And that's why we need to be strong within Glasgow, and every department is going to be affected by this. They think they'll pass the buck come next year's elections, probably not. Right, because it's easy to kick the can down another part where they potentially could be taken over the south. Then we go through the same process again. I think it's shocking that it happened in the first place. There's a lot of responsibility. It doesn't matter losing Charles. Labour started it, the SNP are going to finish it. It should never happened. Never have happened. They took the wrong advice at the very start of this. It's a pay scheme that never should have happened. Every other council in Scotland uses the Red Book scheme, some kind of for some reason in Glasgow used London Borough scheme, and it's had a detrimental effect on everybody's wages, especially the women here who've done a fantastic campaign back in 2018. That was something that was special, something I've never seen before, and they fought right to the bitter end and they got every penny they deserved. But again, Glasgow City Council at this point again will try to short-change them. And there's no doubt we will all stand together as workers, shoulder to shoulder again with our comrades within the equal pay dispute. Because it's going to be something that's going to affect everybody. Wages should not go down because the system is broken. Wages should go up. So I hope that we get all the support for everybody, because it's going to affect everybody in the near future. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to come back and say there, can I just say, glad you made it, Chris, my brother, right? Yeah, when you're saying about the job evaluation, no, we don't have any faith in it. Well, we don't have any faith in it at all, because we know it's just going to be appeals. They've already started doing it, but they're only doing it with higher up positions because they can do it online. Okay, which is no good for anybody that it's not competent online. So we're refusing for them to do it with the low paid workers who cannot do that at the moment. That's just to answer that one. We've not got any confidence in it at all at the moment. Just another thing, I want to say, the local authority there that Chris was saying, you were saying there about the Glasgow City Council. In 2018, when we all went on strike, okay, the whole of the unions united across the city, we all went on strike together to get for this. And the Clemson came out in solidarity with us. You know, all these men who have been picketing all week again, losing wages. They're low earners as well, and that was it. So they lost actually 2 days' wages as well back then completely. They didn't get a penny again because they refused to cross the picket line in solidarity. And that's the thing, is the solidarity and the strength when workers unite. When you get a struggle and you unite, you get that solidarity and strength, because I believe, and it's my belief, right, and I quite often think out the box, but it's my belief that Glasgow City Council, when we were court in 2018 and they saw the strength of these workers striking, picketing, especially with the sensitivity of the work that we did, carers and school staff, and then they saw the support and solidarity for the cleansing workers and the department attendants as well. I must have to add to that one. Glasgow City Council were not in the local authority pay scheme, okay? Glasgow City Council always did their own pay awards every year. All right, they were in the COSLA group with other 31 local authorities. They were in that group. But after that show of strength, and I think that's what it's been that show of strength for the workers that are struggling, that have found their voice and they're fighting for the things. The Glasgow City Council scurried back to the COSLA group, okay? And they're hiding behind the coattails now, every other local authority in the Scottish Government, to still not give these workers what they've deserved in every year. So, again, I'll just say solidarity, and let's just keep up the fight.
Student and secondary studies involving the point of view is that all protests are done from struggles, their struggles, and have been no protest at all. And I think that applies to most aspects. Most of the aspects we're here talking about tonight, be it the climate change or the European fight as well, and indeed just extend solidarity as explained as always to the workers and just thank everybody who did turn up tonight and show their support.
Usually have taken in on Thursday.
We have implemented Thursday, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Inverness, Aberdeen, Dublin.
7 morning.
No, we're doing back to May ones. Back to Glasgow and Edinburgh will be Glasgow Central and Edinburgh Waverley. 9:30 at night, so 11 is our deadline for the Central Bill. We want to be further out earlier in the evening. It all coincides with trains and departure times.
Yeah. So I'd certainly encourage people to go along and show their support.
Thursday, Friday night will be.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, man. Sarah?
Yeah, I just thought there's been a common theme I said tonight. Those that have been the key workers throughout this pandemic are typically seen as low skilled, so people think they should be low paid. And something we've been talking about the same as union is the fact that not everybody could stand on the end of an oven for 12 hours tipping out hot tins. Not everybody could make 64 sandwiches an hour at breaks. Not everybody could stand and put cherries on the top of a bacon tart. All those three sound really easy, but have you ever actually tried to do any of them? So we need to speak more about the skills that our members have got, because there's a reason our members do them and they're in queues of people trying to do them, because they're not for everybody. And we want to get to a point where the public are saying, why aren't they being paid £15 an hour? Not why should they be? Because in 2021 we shouldn't get us that. We should be raising everybody up. So I know we're streaming this live because I've seen it on Twitter as I've been retweeting things. So I just want to say, if you come across this and you're walking through Glasgow and you see a street cleaner, or you're going through a tube or a train station and you see a member of staff, or you're going to a greg shop, treat them with dignity and respect, because they're being paid too bloody low for the jobs that they do and the skills that they have. And we stand in solidarity in this room and the trade union movement. We need to raise everybody up £15 an hour minimum, whatever age they are. Thank you.
I just want to say a few things that I realise I get to finish at 9 o'clock. One thing I'd like to say is, my sister is the pioneering employment lawyer Carol Fox, and she would break my legs if I left this meeting without pointing out the Glasgow City Council, in tandem with virtually every local authority in Britain, defied legal defeats for more than 20 years for they lost in court equal pay legislation agreements to give women equal pay for men, work of equal value, that have been in the legislative order books for 20 years, and Glasgow City Council, in common with every other local authority in Scotland, spent tens of millions, yes, tens of millions of pounds of your money defying the legal right to equal pay for women,
They did that for 20 years, whether they were Labour or SNP administrations, which was both outrageous and the biggest injustice of it all. As Shona will tell you, how many women died in that 20 years, denied the justice they were entitled to, the equal pay, whether they were care workers, whether they were dinner ladies, whatever they did, they died. They died, they didn't get any pay, they'll never get any pay, their families never get any justice. And I have to say that took far, far too long. And I have to say, and I stand here as a socialist, a trade union member all my life, the trade union movement didn't do anywhere near as well a job as they should have. They didn't do anywhere near the job they should have. And that's what we have to live with. So the women in Glasgow City Council are still denied the money that the court has ordered them. The council should hang its head in shame, because those women will pass away and they'll still not get it. And you know the reason? It's money. They're terrified. They're terrified of the cost of the settlement. It's only 2 or 3 years ago that Richie was talking about Glasgow City Council, were talking about selling the Salvador Dali in order to pay the women the money they're entitled to. They're still not got it. So we are entitled as socialists to say we are furious as a movement that women have been denied something they should have got decades ago. I'm sure that's something that we can all join in solidarity. The two things I wanted to say, Richie, were the questions directed towards the public ownership. The issue, I think Annie asked the question, what does public ownership mean? And I'm sorry to say it's highly contested. Highly contested. I grew up in Motherwell. The British steel industry was publicly owned. My arse, it was owned by the same people who owned it when it was private. There was a workers' director sat on the board and they applied for it. And the publicly owned industries of the 1970s and 80s were an insult to working people. And I can tell you that on behalf of the steel industry in Motherwell, I'm sure the Tories and the rest of Britain would like to say the same. It's highly contested because the funny thing is, public ownership is intensely popular in this country, hugely popular. If you ask anybody really or anywhere else, we'd rather a service publicly provided or privately provided. They would argue it needs to be publicly owned. The difference is public ownership means that it has to be owned, it has to be controlled, it has to be run in the interest of the public. And Annie mentioned it's called Lothian Regional Transport. Edinburgh City Council does have bus service. Lothian Regional Transport is owned by the 4 local authorities nearby. Edinburgh City, Mid Lothian, East Lothian and West Lothian. And you know the idiots who run it, they refer to it as the locally owned business. As if it's the local that matters. It's not the local, it's the public that matters. It should be publicly owned. That's what we should be bragging about. And it's one of the few, I stand all day long and criticise Edinburgh City Council, would be here at 9 o'clock next year. The point, Edinburgh City Council, or the Lothian Regional Transport, at least Chris can correct me if I'm wrong since he's a bus worker and he knows this industry. As I understand it, is the only remaining publicly owned transport company in any city in Britain. The only one left. And I happen to think that public ownership is about who controls it, how it's run, whose interests it's run on, and we have a long ways to go, and I think the socialist movement can tap into a great deal of goodwill. The public wants to see it, and we have to tap into that there. The final question is really what Rima asked. You're quite right, Rima, to draw attention to the embargo, the blockade that Cuba has suffered since the year I was born. It is an outrage that a country like Cuba, 90 miles from Miami, they can't have any American produce here on sale. They can't get anything in, they can't get anything out. In that tiny wee country, and maybe those of us who support independence in Scotland could recognise a symmetry living close to a bigger country where we don't think we get the justice for entitled. It's an outrage, and the Scottish Socialist Party are both proud of the Cuban Revolution, that we've supported these last 60 years, and can tell you, and our International Secretary, as you know, Richard, will tell me if I didn't mention it, the Scottish Socialist Party conferences in Glasgow at the end of this month will have a representative of the Cuban government addressing our conference to come to the points that Rima has made, and I'll credit you for that, Rima. And the last thing I wanted to say is I think everybody's sense is that COP26 for me is a Rubicon. And the Rubicon is I don't expect very much to come out of it. But I think with my eyes and my ears from Saturday and all evidence round about me shows me the majority of the world's population believe that COP26, the United Nations and governments are drinking at the last chance saloon. They'll be picking the low-hanging fruit. They went for the easy things to change. They're now under considerable scrutiny to ensure that the real change comes forward. And I think that's what Saturday was about. That's what the protest to the young people that Jamie and others were out on Friday was about. And to me, that's a reflection. Glasgow leads the way. I believe the whole world feels the same way as we did on Saturday. Now, the vast majority of the world's population, working people, are sick to the back teeth of gas. It's now time for action, my friend. And this better be the last conference where all we get is gas, and we better start delivering. I'm sure that's the case for working people, the binmen, the railway staff that have been striked, the whole world. We're sick to the back teeth of the talking. You better start delivering. You better start delivering for us, or there'll be consequences.
And in drawing the meeting to a close, to a conclusion, can I say first of all a huge thanks to all the different speakers who I think in every single case has done either the membership that they represent and or the ideas that they represent immense pride, because it's been a very clear, tight, well-conducted series of speeches that put out a different vision of the world that we want. Now, to draw to a conclusion, I'll repeat the appeal to donate something towards the cause of organising this, in whichever way and to whatever extent you can afford. I'll repeat the appeal that you buy a copy of the new book that we've produced, which takes up all these issues and others, and shows that far from having a hair-short society future, we're going to have a society of plenty, based on a complete reorganisation of the economy, led by the working class, with democratic public ownership, as people have quite rightly spelled out in this there in detail in that publication. I had hopefully to arm you with facts and arguments and historical examples as well. But I would also say that if you agree with the vast majority of what's been said tonight, then remember one simple thing. The Scottish Socialist Party, when we were formed in 1998, adopted the motto, struggle, solidarity, socialism. That was our fighting slogan, our fighting motto. We stand by that to this day, unlike others who have run afraid of such ideas, of either struggle or solidarity, let alone socialism. We stand in solidarity with workers who are in struggle, including the people on this platform that are and are about to be in struggle, and others as well, of course. We stand not just for solidarity, but for socialism as a completely new kind of society that we require. And to put it another way, given the theme of tonight's meeting, given the background of the COP26 conference, let me be so bold as to use what's almost become a cliche. You have to be red to be green. Because put it this way, if you don't have public ownership of energy, of transport, of construction, and of the banks who currently finance the fossil fuel companies to pollute the earth and exploit people and use places like India and Ghana, for example, in Africa, as dumping grounds for e-waste, amongst other things, where actually the e-waste economy is bigger than the gross domestic product of 120 countries on this planet. That's a fact, because of built-in obsolescence, where your phone or your car or your devices are deliberately built not to last, so they can produce even more in order to then make even more profit for the tiny handful. That society has to be finished by a socialist solution, hence the phrase red to be green. And to put it a different way, even domestically, you need to be red to be green, because the Scottish Green Party are now propping up the SNP government. And it'll be interesting to see what they say when it comes to implementing the cuts that are planned on the railways next year. Will they revolt? Will they bring down that plan which the current SNP government is backing? Or will they, for example, put forward absurd and counterproductive ideas like they did a couple of years ago when they said to the SNP, we'll support your budget that includes cuts to local authorities with the consequences for workers at this table, provided you do one thing for us, sent the Greens to the SNP, provided you bring in a law in Scotland that a council can introduce parking fees at workplaces. So that, for example, I had to drive in the middle of the night, 3 in the morning to get to work. There was no such thing as a bus service, so no choice. But if their scheme was brought in by Glasgow Renfrewshire City Council, where it worked, if that was brought in, it would mean I'd be paid £400 or £500 a year for the same amount of pollution, same in the drive the same car, because there's no bus service as a choice, as an available option. It's absurd, and it's a reflection of the fact that if you don't base yourself on a class understanding of society and the interests of the working class majority, you end up putting nonsense like that forward, which takes money out of working class people's pockets and continues to pollute the planet regardless. Does nothing for converting it to a green society in Scotland. So if you want to be green, you need to be red. If you want to tackle pollution and poverty, you need to be a socialist. And if you're going to be a socialist, don't be on your own. Join together with others. Join the Scottish Socialist Party if you're convinced by it, and then convince at least one other. And through that, like you do in the union, in the workplace, the strength grows, the snowball effect rolls down the hill, and you become stronger and stronger until such time as we become an invincible force that the rich cannot stop. So, well done to everybody for turning out in such weather. A particular big thanks to all the speakers, some of whom have travelled from places like Wakefield to be here, which I know where it is, and family links, and know the place well and how far it is. And people who have travelled from the picket lines and from the struggles of their own workplace to come to this meeting and make it all the richer for your experiences and your opinions. Thanks very much for everything. Band together, be confident, and we can change the future for the working class. Thanks very much.